You grew up a serf on a nobleman's estate, somewhere in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, bound to land that was never yours, working fields that fed a lord you rarely even saw in person. Your family owed labor, grain, and obedience, generation after generation, with no real path toward anything different. You remember watching your father grow old before his time, bent from decades of work that enriched everyone, except the people actually doing it. You were maybe 18 when you finally ran. There's no single dramatic reason, just an accumulation of small, unbearable indignities. A punishment that went too far. A rumor of a place downriver where men like you could simply disappear and start over as someone new. That place is a name whispered with a strange mixture of fear and longing across the entire region. The Zaporozhian Sich, a fortified settlement built on islands beyond the Dnieper River's dangerous rapids, home to men who call themselves Cossacks. Free warriors answering to no lord, no landowner, nobody but each other. Getting there wasn't safe. You traveled mostly at night, avoiding roads, living off whatever you could forage or steal, genuinely terrified the entire journey that you'd be caught, dragged back, and punished in ways that don't bear thinking about too closely. Runaway serfs who reach the Sich, you'd heard, are considered free the moment they arrive. No questions asked about your past. No demands for papers or proof of noble birth. Just a simple, almost unbelievable rule. If you made it here, you're one of us now. When you finally see the Sich for the first time, a rough wooden fortress rising from the reeds and marshland, boats and horses everywhere. Men in wildly varied, colorful clothing, moving with a swagger you've genuinely never witnessed among people from your old life. Something in your chest loosens for the first time in years. Whatever hardship waits for you here. And there will be plenty of it. It's going to be hardship you chose for yourself as a free man, rather than one inherited from birth and enforced by someone else's whip. The Sich isn't a city exactly, and it isn't quite a military camp either. It's something stranger, built entirely around the idea that free men can govern themselves without kings or nobles telling them how. Physically, it's a fortified settlement of wooden buildings and barracks called cauldrons, surrounded by earthen walls and palisades, situated deliberately on islands beyond the Dnieper's dangerous rapids. Terrain that makes any serious attack difficult, while keeping the Sich reasonably isolated from Polish, Russian, or Ottoman authority. You're assigned to one of these cauldrons, essentially a large communal barracks household, dozens of men sharing space, meals, and mutual obligation to each other. What genuinely surprises you coming from a world where your entire existence was dictated by inherited noble authority is how the Sich actually governs itself. Major decisions get made at a general assembly called the Rada, where any Cossack, regardless of background or how long he's been here, can speak and vote. Leaders, including the supreme commander called the Hetman, are elected rather than born into position and can be removed by the same assembly if the community loses confidence in them. You've genuinely never witnessed anything like this before. Authority that exists because people collectively agree to grant it, rather than simply being imposed from birth. There's a strict, almost monastic rule running underneath all this freedom, though. Women aren't permitted to live within the Sich itself, a rule tied both to practical military discipline and to the Sich's identity as a warrior brotherhood rather than an ordinary settlement. Many Cossacks maintain families in nearby villages along the Dnieper, visiting when circumstances allow, but the Sich itself remains a purely male, martial space, Life here runs on a strange combination of genuine democratic equality and brutal practical necessity. Everyone contributes labor. Everyone shares in both hardship and plunder relatively equally, and status gets earned through demonstrated skill and courage rather than inherited privilege. It's chaotic sometimes, occasionally violent when disputes flare up, but underneath the roughness you sense something you never experienced back on that nobleman's estate. Genuine, if imperfect, brotherhood between equals. Cossack clothing favors loose, practical garments adapted heavily from both Ottoman and Tatar styles, picked up through generations of contact, sometimes trade, sometimes conflict. Along this contested borderland, you wear wide trousers called sharovary, often dyed in bold colors, tucked into soft leather boots, a loose linen shirt, and over it, depending on weather and wealth, a jupan, a long coat that can range from simple practical wool for someone like you early on to elaborately decorated silk for wealthier, more established Cossacks who've earned real plunder over the years. Your hair marks you immediately as Cossack to anyone who sees you. Most of your head gets shaved, except for a single long lock left growing from the crown, called an osledets, a style that's part practical, less hair to grab in close combat, part deliberate cultural statement, marking you visually and permanently as belonging to this specific brotherhood, rather than to your old life as a serf. A long, sweeping mustache completes the look, something nearly every Cossack cultivates with genuine pride. Weapons take real investment, and here again, the economics matter enormously. A basic sword, called a shabla, is essential, along with a bow initially, since firearms remain relatively expensive and harder to maintain reliably out here. As you prove yourself and accumulate resources through raiding, you'll eventually upgrade toward a musket, considerably more effective but requiring real coin or plunder to acquire and maintain properly. Your horse might be the single most important possession you'll ever own. Cossack identity is deeply, inseparably tied to horsemanship. You're expected to ride skillfully, almost immediately, and a good horse represents both practical survival and genuine status within the community. You spend considerable early effort either earning enough through labor and small raids to purchase a decent horse, or, if you're being fully honest with yourself, occasionally simply taking one during a raid against Tatar settlements, an uncomfortable but genuinely common reality of how this economy actually functions out here. Between the clothing, the weapons, and the horse, you understand something clearly within your first weeks. Becoming a proper Cossack isn't just about swearing loyalty or surviving initiation. It's an ongoing, expensive process of slowly acquiring the physical markers and tools that separate a real, respected Cossack from someone merely passing through. Your Kurin cooks and eats together, gathered around large shared pots rather than individual portions. A practical necessity given how many men share each barracks, but also a genuine ritual of belonging. Kulish, a thick porridge made from millet, often mixed with whatever fat, fish, or vegetables happen to be available, forms a genuine staple of daily eating here. It's simple food, filling rather than refined, exactly what you'd expect from a community that prioritizes practical sustenance over culinary luxury. Fish from the Dnieper supplements your diet regularly, along with game hunted from the surrounding marshland and steppe when circumstances allow. Bread appears when grain supplies permit, though the Sich's relative isolation means food security genuinely fluctuates depending on season, successful trade, and how recent raids or conflicts have disrupted normal supply patterns. You've experienced both genuinely well-fed stretches and considerably leaner periods within just your first year here. Drink, though, might be even more central to Cossack culture than food itself. Gorilka, a strong grain spirit similar to vodka, flows constantly through Sich social life. Celebrations after successful raids, evening gatherings around the Kurin fire, simple relief from the tension of border life. Drinking here isn't a quiet, private activity. It's loud, communal, often accompanied by singing, storytelling, and the kind of boisterous camaraderie that cements bonds between men who genuinely need to trust each other in dangerous situations. You've learned quickly that hospitality runs deep in Cossack culture, even among men who might have been strangers just weeks earlier. Sharing food and drink freely with fellow Cossacks isn't simply politeness. It's a genuine expression of the brotherhood this entire community is built around. The same equality and mutual obligation that governs the Sich's political structure extending naturally into how you eat, drink, and relax together after the day's demands are finished. Nobody hands you a formal training schedule here. You learn primarily by watching, imitating, and repeatedly failing until your body finally understands what your mind has been trying to grasp. Horsemanship comes first, and it comes hard. If you didn't grow up around horses the way some Cossacks did, you spend exhausting early weeks simply learning to ride confidently. Experienced Cossacks occasionally offering blunt correction, more often simply letting you fall, get back up, and try again until competence arrives through sheer repetition. Eventually, you're expected to fight effectively from horseback, a skill that takes considerably longer to develop than basic riding alone. Swordsmanship follows a similarly informal but demanding path. Sparring happens constantly around the Sich, sometimes structured, often simply spontaneous practice between men with nothing better to do during quiet stretches. You absorb technique gradually, correcting your stance and grip through countless repetitions, occasionally earning genuine praise from veterans when you finally execute a difficult maneuver cleanly. Marksmanship, whether with bow or eventually musket, matters enormously too, particularly for the kind of raiding and border skirmishing that defines most actual Cossack combat, rather than large pitched battles. You practice regularly against simple targets, competitive shooting contests becoming genuine entertainment during slower periods at the Sich, men wagering small amounts on accuracy while simultaneously sharpening skills that might save their lives during the next raid. Beyond individual combat skill, you learn something harder to name directly: the particular rhythm and instinct required for border warfare specifically. Reading terrain, moving quietly, striking fast, and retreating before organized resistance can properly form. This isn't the disciplined formation fighting of a standing European army. It's faster, looser, built around speed, surprise, and intimate knowledge of terrain that larger, more conventional forces genuinely struggle to match. By the time several months have passed, you've transformed considerably from the frightened runaway serf who first arrived here. You're not yet a veteran by any means, but you've developed enough genuine skill and confidence that when your Kurin starts planning its next raid, you're no longer simply watching from the sidelines. You're expected to ride along. The target is a small Tatar settlement near the steppe border, chosen after careful scouting reports about its defenses, livestock, and general vulnerability. This isn't reckless aggression. It's calculated, practical opportunity. You ride out before dawn with a modest raiding party, perhaps 30 or 40 Cossacks, moving fast and quiet across open steppe terrain. You've spent recent weeks learning to read properly. Nobody talks much during the approach. There's a particular tension in this kind of riding, adrenaline and focus replacing casual conversation entirely. The raid itself happens fast, exactly the way it's supposed to. Your group strikes at first light, catching the settlement genuinely unprepared, moving quickly to secure livestock and portable valuables while avoiding prolonged, unnecessary combat wherever possible. You're not here to conquer territory or hold ground. You're here for cattle, horses, and whatever coin or goods can be quickly gathered before organized resistance has time to properly form. There's real danger, regardless of the raid's relatively small scale. You find yourself briefly exchanging blows with a defender near the settlement's edge. Adrenaline overriding conscious thought as your recent training finally gets tested under genuine pressure rather than practice conditions. It's over quickly though. A few tense, chaotic minutes rather than sustained battle. And soon, your party is already withdrawing, with captured livestock, moving fast back toward friendlier territory before any organized Tatar response can properly mobilize. Riding back afterward, exhausted but genuinely alive, you understand something that no amount of training back at the Sich could have fully prepared you for emotionally. This is what actual Cossack life mostly consists of. Far more often than the large historical battles that get remembered in songs and stories later. Small, calculated, dangerous raids like this one, repeated regularly, forming the genuine economic and martial backbone of this entire way of life. Back at the Sich, the captured livestock and goods get gathered together for division. And this process reveals something important about how this entire community actually functions economically. Plunder gets divided according to established custom, rather than simple rank or seniority. Every participant in the raid receives a fair share, with slightly larger portions, typically going toward those who took greater risks or contributed particularly valuable tactical decisions during the raid itself. This isn't charity or forced equality. It's practical self-interest, recognizing that a system perceived as genuinely fair keeps Cossacks willing to keep riding together on future raids, rather than fracturing into resentful, distrustful factions. Your own share is modest, but genuinely meaningful. A portion of captured livestock you can either keep, trade, or sell, along with a small amount of coin and goods. It's nowhere near a fortune, but compared to the complete lack of personal property you experience as a serf, even this modest plunder represents something you've never actually possessed before. Resources that are unambiguously, completely yours. You watch veteran Cossacks around you make different choices with their own accumulated wealth over the years. Some invest steadily in better weapons and horses, slowly building toward genuine status and military effectiveness within the community. Others spend more freely on drink and immediate pleasure. Understandable given how genuinely uncertain and dangerous this entire lifestyle remains. A few, you've heard, eventually save enough to quietly leave the Sich behind entirely, establishing farms or families in nearby settlements while maintaining looser ties to their old Cossack brotherhood. There's an uncomfortable economic truth underneath all of this that you're beginning to fully understand. Cossack raiding directly displaces genuine suffering onto Tatar and Ottoman border communities, families losing livestock and security to fund your own community's survival and relative prosperity. You don't spend much time dwelling on this morally complicated reality, mostly because survival out here doesn't leave much room for extended ethical reflection. But it sits there anyway, quietly, underneath the practical business of dividing captured cattle. Word reaches the Sich that a larger Tatar force is moving through the border region. Likely retaliation for recent Cossack raiding activity, including possibly your own recent expedition. Your Kurin, along with several others, mobilizes quickly to intercept before the Tatars can strike deeper into settled territory. This isn't the massive pitched battle you might picture from grander historical campaigns. It's smaller, faster, more improvised, exactly matching the general rhythm of border warfare that defines most actual Cossack military experience. You ride out with several hundred fellow Cossacks, considerably more than your earlier raiding party, but still nowhere near the scale of a formal European battlefield engagement. Contact happens suddenly, along a stretch of open steppe where scouts spotted the Tatar force earlier that morning. There's no elaborate battlefield formation here, no careful pre-planned tactical maneuvering, just fast, chaotic mounted combat, Both sides trying to gain quick advantage through speed and aggression, rather than sustained, disciplined engagement. You fight mounted, exactly as trained. Your sword and recently acquired firearm both seeing genuine use for the first time under real combat pressure. The fighting is intense, but relatively brief. Maybe 20 or 30 minutes of genuine chaos before the Tatar force, recognizing they're facing a prepared, numerically comparable Cossack response rather than an easy target, begins withdrawing rather than committing to a prolonged, costly engagement. You emerge from the clash exhausted, adrenaline slowly draining away, with minor wounds, but genuinely, fully alive. Looking around at your fellow Cossacks, similarly worn but intact, you understand something clearly about this entire way of life you've chosen. There's no permanent safety out here, no clear moment where the danger simply ends. Just this: recurring cycles of raid, retaliation, and defense. An ongoing rhythm that will likely define the rest of your life for as long as you choose to remain part of this brotherhood. You survive the clash, and life at the Sich settles back into its familiar rhythm. Training, communal meals, occasional raids, the ever-present possibility of danger, balanced against a freedom you never once experienced during your years as a serf. Looking back now, months into this new existence, you understand something clearly that you couldn't have fully grasped, standing at the edge of that nobleman's estate, the night you finally ran. This life isn't safe, and it was never going to be safe. Cossack existence runs on genuine risk. Raids, retaliation, the constant possibility that any given expedition might be your last. But it's a risk you chose freely, for yourself, rather than danger and hardship simply imposed on you by someone else's inherited authority. You've built something here that your old life never offered. Genuine brotherhood among equals. A voice in how your community actually governs itself. And personal property earned through your own effort and courage, rather than granted or withheld at a lord's whim. It's a rough, sometimes brutal existence, built partly on displacing hardship onto neighboring communities through raiding. You're honest enough with yourself to recognize that uncomfortable truth rather than pretending this life is purely noble or heroic. But standing here now, sword at your side, horse grazing nearby, surrounded by men who chose this exact same difficult freedom over safer, more predictable submission, you wouldn't trade it back. Whatever else this life is, it's genuinely, completely yours.